up, everybody? Welcome into the How Not to Be a Youth Pastor podcast, everybody's favorite podcast, especially for those looking to just waste an hour of their lives, which is what we're here to do for people every single week.
And they feel so much better about themselves because they go, at least I'm not like those two guys.
At least I'm more productive than Kyle and Derek with my time.
Yep.
Because not only do they sit down and record this episode, but then they have to like process it. They've got to think up what they're going to talk about.
They have to type it out.
Type it all out. Well, sometimes it gets typed out. We've got a show doc for this one.
We do.
We don't always have a show doc.
Case in point, last episode.
That is true. The last episode we had no show doc, but I thought it was okay. It went well.
I thought so.
However, this is the final episode of season 2. For our listeners who are unaccustomed to our schedule.
Sure.
We take the summers off, and so
why?
This will be
because we're lazy.
Because we are lazy,
to do anything.
And or because we have so much going on in the summer that it makes it very hard.
That's actually true. Yes.
Mission teams and camp and vacations and all that stuff. So we take the summers off. This will be our last episode for season 2. We'll be back in the fall for season 3, and keep an eye out for a special episode dropping this summer. Which apparently, as of last episode, will be a youth pastor decathlon, which I would have a lot of fun with. I don't know that I'd win, but I would have a lot of fun.
I think I'd do okay.
I don't think I would come in last.
Yeah.
Which would be that'd be like 98% of my goal is not get. The other 2% would be to not get hurt.
That's fair.
But not coming in last is for sure my goal.
You know, we joked, but we should legitimately do this.
I'm very interested.
Okay.
I think Riley would be in.
Yep.
I don't really want to invite him because I think he'd win.
Yep.
But
we need him.
But we need warm bodies.
Yep.
We'll figure it out. We'll put it together. How Not to Be a Youth Pastor is the name of the podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. We are on YouTube as well under the same name, and Instagram at HowNot_YP. We'd love to connect with you all summer. Shoot us your questions, comments, concerns, constructive criticism, and unconstructive criticism. We will take it all. And we love suggestions for episodes as we go into season 3.
Absolutely.
We are much like all good pastors, we are running out of good original content. And so we...
That's accurate.
And so maybe we should just go back and redo all of our episodes from season 1 with new wisdom.
Yeah.
That'd be a good idea.
Remastered's kind of the thing right now, right?
Yeah,
like
that's true.
like Lion King is been remastered.
Or we could do live action remakes of our episodes.
Right.
We'll just go back and say the exact same stuff, but we're on video
this time
for the first 60 episodes or whatever it was that we weren't.
Done.
That's a great idea. So today is the last episode of the season. We are going to be talking about starting Bible studies, but before we do that, as is now tradition, if you do something twice, is it now a tradition?
No, I think it's 3 times.
3 times? Yeah, because like the line, like connecting 2 dots is just a line.
Yep.
But connecting 3 dots is now you've got a trend. So when we do this a 3rd time, it'll be officially a tradition. But for now, it's just a trend. It's 2 data points.
Yeah.
Reminiscing on the great times that we have had over the last year. And so I'll go first here because I think yours is funnier. So we love to go back and look at some of the best moments of season 2. And our quick question today is, what was the best moment from season 2? And so I would like to share a clip. And fortunately, this came after we started recording video.
Like just after. This is like I think
one of the first
or
episodes.
second episode. Yeah.
But back in episode 72, which was not that long, a couple months ago, we were talking about not being lazy as leaders. And so I took it upon myself to be productive with my time. While you were talking, I was being productive. We'll just roll the tape.
And for those who are watching online, you can really appreciate this because
Stop it. No, it's
Kyle
a secret.
is stacking candy. If you're listening to the audio version, I really encourage you to go to our Instagram or go to our YouTube so you can
Tucker's
see this.
for sure making a video out of this.
I mean, first of all, I'm just gonna say I'm impressed.
Thank you.
Because those are very oblong shaped Jolly Ranchers. I also hope
Just for the record, I'm also doing this left-handed.
that's even more impressive.
There it is.
There
All right,
it
it fell
is.
over. My tower fell.
Did you do that
Jolly
on purpose
Rancher.
during the lazy segment?
I was
here?
being productive
Okay, well, there's that.
with my time. Oh man, that is great. It was so they were like the little Jolly Rancher chews.
Yes.
So they were pretty square, rectangular-ish, but
not like Starburst where they have like a distinct and definitive shape.
yeah, there's a little bit of lumpiness to it, and so stacking them left-handed was kind of a challenge.
I didn't even know what to say. Like it's so funny. Like it's so funny listening back to that clip because I can literally like see myself like processing like I don't know what to do right now.
Right.
Like because I was like so caught off guard because like you were like trying and like it just so like I literally got distracted by what you were doing and like the word oblong. I don't know if I've said that word since. Like
Probably not.
I don't know.
Yeah, before that or since. That was a one-time shot there.
So it's just so funny watching back that, knowing what I was thinking in the moment and going.
Yeah, I will again formally apologize to Derek on the podcast for my lack of attention in that moment. So Derek, what was your favorite memory from
my
the
gosh.
season 2 of the podcast?
Okay, so full disclosure, I don't often like listen back to our episodes because I get self-conscious. I do watch them back for like instructive purposes, like how do you get better at communicating? What are the things that you do that you want to improve, so on and so forth. But I intentionally went back to this episode because it was so funny in the moment, and even thinking about it now makes me laugh. But it was episode 60. It was the second time Riley was on, my youth pastor, and he he was gonna host the initials game for us because we had like a fun episode that way. And so he's on, and it was the episode right after Christmas. It came out on December 29th.
Yeah,
but
it came out December 29th.
Yes.
We did not record it December 29th.
we recorded it before Christmas. And so you asked me on that episode.
I think it was the quick question.
It was, how was my Christmas? And so I had to.
I don't think I told you I was going to ask that.
No,
either.
you didn't. You just sprung it on me. You're like, oh, I got a question. And then you looked at me and goes, How was your Christmas? And,
Yep.
and so I forecasted what I was going to be doing for Christmas and then came to you as if that's what I had actually done. And then I did the same thing to you. And so we went into probably 2.5 minutes each of how our Christmas was.
And it had not happened, so it was all malarkey.
Which is hilarious alone. Like that part alone's enough.
Yeah, that's not even the funny part
No.
that we're broadcasting right now.
But then as you finish up, I'm sitting here, if you're watching online, I'm sitting on the right side of the desk. Riley is to the left of me. Kyle's across from Riley. And so in the middle is my phone, and it starts to ring, and it's my wife. And so it kind of throws off like a little bit of the mojo. And so you take liberty upon yourself to acknowledge that my phone's ringing.
Yes, obviously.
But
now hold on. I got to give a quick pro marriage tip.
for sure.
Like if you are married and your spouse calls, I am answering that phone like every single time.
Yep.
Unless I like literally just miss the call. Like if I'm in a meeting, if I'm doing something important and my wife calls, I'm picking it up.
Yep.
Because half the time she knows, like if she knows I'm in the meeting and she's calling me anyway,
Something's going down.
yeah, it's important. And so I'll call it. I'll answer the call, and if it's like, hey, we're recording right now, can I call you back? Yes. Okay. Cool. If that's all it is, that's a huge win in the communication of your marriage.
sure.
And so I want to just before we play the clip, we have to give Derek the props because answering the phone was the right thing to do. As funny as it was for the context of the podcast.
Should we roll it?
Yeah, let's roll it. Well, while Derek fields a call from his wife. Riley, how are you? Glad to have you back for another episode.
Oh, thanks. Hey, and also thanks for asking me how my Christmas was too. It was great. But
oh my gosh.
I literally, I don't know if there's been a funnier moment that I have had, just because like he said it so quick. Like he came up with that immediately, and it was just so funny because we literally spent like the first 5 minutes of that episode talking about each of our respective pretend Christmases.
I don't think he said a word.
He didn't. He sat right. You would not have known he was on the episode until that moment.
I would have to look back. Did we even acknowledge him at all until that point?
Not at all.
That was his first words on the podcast.
Yeah, because you say, hey, Riley, welcome back to the podcast. Like that was his first words on the show after 5 minutes.
Sass.
Oh, he is awesome.
That's pretty on brand for both Riley and for our podcast.
That's correct. Yeah,
that's true. So we appreciate you guys. Let us know. If there were other memories. I mean, we could only pick two, but if there were other memories that you appreciated over the last season of the podcast, we'd love to reminisce with you, and we're looking forward to a great season 3. But we've got one more episode before we get there, Derek.
We do. What are we talking about?
We're talking about studying the Word of God.
Nice.
Because apparently that's important.
I'd say so.
Supposedly, it's one of the things we're supposed to do as Christians. But I wanted to kind of close out season 2 with this episode because this is something that applies to literally every listener that we have. Studying the Word of God is important. It is talked about as important, but I don't think it is talked about enough of like how to do it.
Correct. Yeah.
And specifically how to do it with other people.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people are like, hey, let's do a Bible study. And then you go and it's like, this is the most unorganized thing you've ever done. Ever.
Or uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly. Or both.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think, to your point, we talk a lot about doing it and how important it is, but then that's where the conversation ends.
Yeah, that's true. And all of the things we're going to talk about today can be done on your own. Mm-hmm. Because I do think that it is also important to spend time in the Word of God, just you.
Correct.
But we are going to be talking about the context of a group Bible study. Mm-hmm. And the first thing that I want to say is that in an ideal world, this Bible study that you are starting or that you are a part of is about 3 to 8 people. That I would say is the sweet spot. Where if one depending on the makeup of the group, if one person is gone, do you still hold Bible study? Like those are you got to answer some of those questions. Is there if you got 8 people and 4 of them are gone, do you we'll skip this week and we'll meet next week? Whatever the structure of it is. I think that some of those communication things are important, but if you only have 2 people, then it's not really a group. It's just a pair. But if you have more than 8 people, that's a lot. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult to build real relationship, in my opinion, when you have more than 8 people in a group.
And it's all the more difficult as well to have constructive and productive conversation in between. Mm-hmm. Just because when you have more than 8 people, there's a lot of different opinions, a lot of different ideas, a lot of different voices that need to be heard. And so unless you want to have a Bible study that goes 4 hours, it just kind of discourages people from sharing because there's, usually probably some other people that have the tendency to dominate conversation.
Yeah, you also don't want to have people who can hide in a conversation.
Right.
You want to be able to hear from everybody naturally.
Yep.
You don't want to have the ability conversationally for the shy, quiet person.
Nice.
To be able to just hide away from the conversation.
Right.
And so that's where, there is, got to be some intentionality. And for some people, for somebody starting a Bible study, it might be, expanding your horizons of who you invite. For other people, it might be, you got to be more intentional about who you invite because you have to cap it at some point. And so that's where I would encourage, I think it's super important for everyone to be a part of a Bible study. Whether it's something that, you decide, hey, we're going to do this for a season, or, hey, we're going to do this long term. But we want to today equip our listeners to be able to, I want you to walk away from this episode feeling like you could start a Bible study with the people that are in your context, some of your friends, some of your coworkers, your family, whoever it is.
Or teach someone to do one. As a youth pastor, you might have students in your ministry who want to start a Bible study, and they go, how do we do it? And these are some things you can draw on. But I think before we jump right in, we also want to kind of give some appropriate credit and caution, I guess you could also say, to some other resources. Because a lot of times you have these different authors, pastors, leaders who write some phenomenal books that you and I love to read, books that, we've learned a lot about. And a lot of these really good books can be one of those things where they have appropriate, study guides and hey, this is a great book. Here's a guide for your church and your staff to go through. And so let's go through that together. And the only problem with that, if that is a problem, is sometimes that can become a substitute for time spent in the Word. Instead of going through a Bible study together as a staff, as a leadership team, as friends, as whatever, we're going to go through this book together. And that, again, it's not that the book is bad. It's just it becomes dangerous when it becomes a substitute for spending time in the Word, because the Word is the truth of God. We need to make sure we have time and mental capacity to accommodate that, first and foremost.
Yeah, I would, an example would be John and Lisa Bevere are authors. I believe both of them are authors. And they have written a ton of great books from, various Christian perspectives, to various Christian audiences. And the books that they write, I've seen small groups, especially with Lisa Bevere's books, hey, we're going to get this group of women together and read and study her book together. And sometimes they can operate more like a book club and less like a Bible study, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I would encourage you to call it like it is. Don't call it a Bible study, call it a book club. But the other problem with some of these is that they can tend to be a little slanted in their perspective. If you get a group together where you are going to, I feel like the women's ministry example is the one that easily comes to my mind because it might be the most popular one, but I don't want to just use that. Hey, this group of women is going to get and read this book and study it. You could have a marriage group that is going to come together and read this book about marriage, and it has biblical context and application to it, but if you use that as the lens in which to view the Bible, then you're getting a tinted view of the Bible. Whatever the view is, if it's a women's ministry view of it, a men's ministry view of it, we're going to study all the masculinity in the Bible.
Right.
Well, okay, but you're missing out on some of the other things in the Bible.
Yep.
They have their place, but I think our point would be not to use it as that, like Derek said, that substitute for just simply studying the Word of God.
Yeah. And the same thing goes for video studies too, because we live in a day and age where you can have same kind of idea, but instead of it being a guide, it is Lisa Bevere, having a camera in her living room and her discussing it through or whatever.
Yeah, you got videos, Right Now Media, great resource. You got Louis Giglio, Francis Chan.
And they're amazing. We're not sitting here saying they're bad because they are phenomenal. I think, I've each personally used them for our personal growth, we've used them in ministry. They're all great. We just want to extend a word of caution that don't just push these and then neglect a Bible study.
Yep.
Like, not that this is a hard and fast rule, but I feel like a 2-to-1 is good. Like, or just even 1-to-1, but like make sure that like you're not pushing studies and books more than the Bible.
Yeah, the other caution that I'll give with both book studies and video series is, people feel comfortable just coming to church on Sunday morning and letting that be their Bible for the week because it's spoon-fed to them. And like a video series where, like, I watched a video series once where Louis Giglio did a study through the book of Colossians. It was great stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if that kind of content is the only thing that I consume,
Mm-hmm.
that's just another sermon that I'm listening to,
Right.
more or less. It's a little more teaching,
Mm-hmm.
but, finding a lot of these resources and pulling them all together and having conversation with one another and really diving into the word itself and not just what somebody else is saying about the word, that'd be kind of our encouragement.
For sure.
And our caution, like Derek said. So, and I will say, if you are going to do one of those two studies, I would still stick to that 3 to 8 people rule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For the exact same reasons that we just said. If you're gonna, do a video series, like watch it and then discuss it, yeah, you can still have somebody get lost in that discussion because you have too many people. So,
Right.
Be mindful of the size of the group for sure. But what we want to do is kind of lay out. I have in here step 1, step 2, but there's only 2 steps. So this is going to be a short episode. He says, as we are 22 minutes in already. So are you adding step 3? Oh, thank you. We're keeping that in there. We'll get there, people. It's not just an inside joke. Step 1 to this hypothetical Bible study that hopefully becomes a reality for a lot of our listeners. If you have 3 to 8 people, you're going to get together for a Bible study. Pick a book or a section of a book that you're going to go through. We'll use, Mark as our example because that is what my Bible study is going through right now.
I love it.
The book of Mark. That's what we're going to read. And so, and we'll use just because we're hypothetical, we'll use me, my wife, Derek, his wife. That's our Bible study right there. The 4 of us, the first thing I'd encourage us to do would be to go through and read Mark chapter 1 and just read it and write down any questions we have. Before we do anything else, read the chapter, write down any questions that we might have about Mark chapter 1.
Question for you.
Yeah.
And again, this could probably be subjective depending on the group and what they're comfortable at. But when you say that, do you assume you read it aloud together or individually in your head?
Great question.
Or do you come ready to read that?
One of the things that you'll have to decide as a group is how often you want to meet.
Sure.
And that's going to be very dependent on who is a part of this group. For 2 married with kids couples like me and Derek are a part of, meeting every single week might not be an option. So maybe it's every other week, which means you've got 2 weeks, from one Bible study to the next. And so this step 1 can happen whenever you want, but it has to happen preferably well before the Bible study where you're actually getting together.
Okay.
Like me on my own, or I could read it aloud and my wife and I could do it together since we live in the same house, but reading it beforehand and just writing down all the questions you have.
Okay.
That's step 1. Step 2 is to execute your role. Now here's what I mean by that. There are hundreds of different resources, probably.
Thousands.
Or thousands or millions.
Yeah.
Of great resources on studying the Bible.
Yep.
It's impossible to go through them all.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I would encourage is assigning different roles to your group. And then that way, everybody kind of studies their own direction. And when you all come together, everybody's bringing a little bit different flavor, a little bit different material, and there's going to be questions that one person had that another person answers because it was kind of in their vein of study.
Yep. So
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, like, what I also like about that, and I was gonna give an example. What I also like about that is it does create buy-in. Because it's one of those things where life gets busy. And so we're going through Mark, and so the first 2 times we're ready. I've read, if we're reading one, if we're meeting every 2 weeks, we're reading Mark chapter 1, Mark chapter 2, then 3 and 4. What happens is sometimes if life gets busy and you're not in charge of anything, you can go, I'll read it quick on the way, or I'll listen to it on my phone. And not that that's not good, because life happens, but when you are in charge of contributing something, it creates a buy-in that you are really ready for. And so when we talk about roles, we're not talking about like, all right, you are going to bring the snacks.
Yeah.
And
those roles are important too.
Yeah.
We don't want to neglect that.
No.
And I will say, like, doing, obviously it depends on, the ages and life stages of everybody in the group. But if you're going to, like, hey, yeah, we're going to meet at this person's house, they're going to make dinner, and somebody else is going to bring a side and a dessert, and like that's
awesome.
I would highly encourage that as well.
Yep. Yeah. But in this particular case, we're going to talk about like definitive roles when it comes to the study itself. So, for example, if we're in Mark, right, the first role you can assign to somebody is, hey, you're in charge of cross-references. So because the Gospels are very synonymous with each other, a lot of times if you're reading a story or a parable about Jesus in Mark, there's probably another cross-reference in Matthew, Luke, or John that you can draw on to get that experience for.
Yeah, I opened Mark chapter 1 here to just see what we're working with. Like, verses 9 through 13 are the baptism and temptation of Jesus.
Yeah.
That's 4 verses for something that some other Gospels
2 chapters.
Have 2 different chapters on.
Yep.
And so the calling of the first disciples, Jesus drives out an evil spirit. There's a couple different things. A man with leprosy. All of this is in Mark chapter 1. And so there's going to be definitely some examples in some other Gospels where it might be a little bit more elaborated in some other Gospels. You have to remember that the 4 Gospels are the same story from 4 different perspectives.
Correct.
And, if Derek and I, both witness something from 2, like, I love the example of, like, if we witness a sporting event, from 2 different directions, we might notice different details. Some of what we see is going to be the same because we're witnessing the same thing.
Right.
But we might see different details that are a little bit different. And so having somebody that can start with those cross-references, I think it's huge.
And what's so cool about that too is, there's so many subtleties within the lines of scripture that just get missed if you're just taking it at face value. Like, for example, a lot of the New Testament writers, Mark being one of them, will draw on Old Testament scriptures, or they will draw on, like, it's what's so cool is when you read the book of Isaiah through the lens of what we know Christ does and who he is, it's profound how many of the prophecies match in a crazy, crazy way. And again, those are things you miss unless you have someone who's looking for them. And so there's a lot of just cool things that, when you have someone who's intentionally looking for the cross-references and the interlap of scripture, it really creates this full picture that the author is trying to paint, because the author knows the background. He knows the prophecies. He knows he said this and they said this. And so they're writing to an audience who also assumes the same thing. So when we get into the head of that writer, we see things from a different perspective.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about the New Testament that is never explicitly said in the New Testament is that most of the people writing the New Testament and living that time period had a lot of the Old Testament memorized.
Right.
Somebody like Matthew had probably almost the whole Old Testament memorized. And so when you, like, Jesus did this, so part of it just comes out subconsciously sometimes. But Jesus did this beautifully where he would quote the Old Testament. And so we get his recorded quote of the Old Testament in the New Testament, and he might have some great teaching in there. There are times where the most profound point that he is making in his teaching is not in what he quotes, it's what comes in the Old Testament right after what he quotes.
Right.
A great example of this is, I believe it is Psalm 22. I literally have a Bible in front of me. Kyle, how about you just open up to Psalm 22 and you could verify it yourself? Let's see.
I like those
here.
problem-solving skills. That was
I
very
know,
good.
right? I'm really good at it. Psalm 22. I'm going to read verse 1. You tell me if it's familiar. My God, why have you forsaken me?
Don't recall.
Don't recall it? Allow me to jog your memory. Obviously that is what Jesus quotes
Right.
on the cross as he is dying. My God, why have you forsaken me? His whole audience there knew that verse.
Right.
They knew Psalm 22.
Yep.
Psalm 22 ends with a declaration of, God, you have not forsaken me.
Mm-hmm.
You have not, your will is not lost on me. And it kind of comes full circle. And that is, there are several lines throughout Psalm 22 that allude to, broken bones and pierced sides and things that allude to the Messiah. And Jesus is intentionally quoting that scripture to draw his audience's minds to the rest of that psalm.
Right.
And that is the kind of thing that this role can bring to a Bible study.
Yeah. When you're looking for that specifically, it's a lot easier to find it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's that's one example. Like if every single person in your Bible study was trying to find that, they'd get nothing else done.
Correct.
So that's a great one, great role to start off with. Another one, and this is going to be a really nerdy one, but having somebody that dives into the original Greek and Hebrew words of the Old Testament and the New Testament, respectively, that is a phenomenal role. The English language sucks. It just does.
And in contrast, the Greek and the Hebrew are amazing.
They're much better languages. And so having somebody that can dive into some of these words that were used, where else in the Bible did that exact Greek word get used? Where else in, what does that Greek word actually mean versus how is it translated? Because those aren't always the same. There's a couple words. There are Greek words in the New Testament that Paul literally makes up because he is trying to translate from Hebrew to Greek. And there's not really a good Greek word. So he makes one up by mashing two Greek words together. And then it gets translated into English and it really sucks.
Right.
And so then you're going all the way back to the Hebrew. A resource online called the Blue Letter Bible. That is a fantastic tool. I think Bible Hub is another one. They have like an interlinear Bible, which basically just means it's like, maybe it is Blue Letter Bible. I don't remember, but that probably has it too. But you can look at like the English and the Greek words, like one on top of the other. And like you can click on the Greek word and then it'll show you, here's all of the other instances in the New Testament where this Greek word pops up. Resources like that can really help make connections and give a clearer understanding as to what some of these words actually mean. And that can bring a lot of depth to a Bible study.
Yeah, because I have also noticed that these languages communicate a lot of emotion in these words as well.
Yeah,
and so it's fascinating to, and you can get carried away with it for sure. Like sometimes you also got to remember context, and that's important. But these are so good. The next one, I think, is one that a lot of pastors are familiar with, but I think there's so much value to anybody reading a commentary. I want to, before I jump into the exact specific, circumstances, there was a leader of a Bible study once that told my dad was newer to the Bible. He was in a Bible study, and he had a study Bible. And those who are familiar with the study Bible, they have notes in the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So this leader told my dad, he discouraged him from reading the notes on the bottom because his point was, let God speak to you what he wants to speak to you through his word, not what other people have said. Which, on one hand, I see that rationale. But when it comes to commentaries, here's the thing. I am not a Greek scholar. I am not a Hebrew scholar.
What?
I am not a Old Testament and New Testament doctoral scholar of this. Do you know who is? David Guzik. Matthew Henry.
Matthew Henry, definitely. That dude writes.
He's insane.
Like he has a doctorate.
You have to like you have to be in the right headspace to read him because he is
You're
deep.
not recommending that one for the 6th grade Bible study?
Probably not. He has a condensed and concise version
It's still not.
It is very
easy
very,
to read.
No, but like where I'm going with all of this is you have to understand that God can and will speak to you just by reading his word at face value. But you also have to be open to the fact that there are people who have dedicated their life to pulling out the truth of what these lines are saying. So learn from them. Learn from them as a teacher is teaching you. You know, you mentioned David Guzik, Enduring Word, phenomenal commentary. It's very thorough, but it's also very concise. And so what I mean by that is he breaks it down verse by verse by verse, and he explains the intricacies of that verse. But I like about what he does as well is he pulls in other scholars as well.
Yeah.
And so he will pull in, here's what this scholar has to say about this verse. So you get a very well-rounded understanding of who he is. I'm not familiar with this next one, though. I think you wrote this one down.
So first of all, Enduring Word 2, like they have a free app that is very easy to use, which I love. We mentioned Matthew Henry, who is a comment that's like for the smartest person in your group, like that his commentary is very hard to read, but it's very good. We mentioned study Bibles, that can be a source like that. That can be a role or part of someone's role is to read the notes that they have in their study Bible if they have one. There's another commentary I found. If you Google Precept Austin commentary, you'll be able to find it. It is, I have no idea who put it together, but it is by far the longest commentary I've ever seen in my life.
Wow.
It would take you days to read through the commentary of a chapter, but a lot of what that one does is it pulls from other commentaries, and there's a lot of historical things they'll bring into it, and so it's very, very well done. For the Bible study that my wife and I are a part of, that reading that commentary is a part of the role that I have for our Bible study. It's more of a skimming than a reading because it is so stinking long.
Right.
But there's a lot of really, really good material in that one as well.
I think you touch on something cool. Is I think, assigning certain people to certain commentaries, I think is so, like don't just put one person in charge of commentaries. Because that's like, that's just too much.
I would highly recommend the Enduring Word commentary by David Guzik as one of the first roles that you assign.
Yep.
I would the Precept Austin one and the Matthew Henry one are those might be numbers like 6, 7, 8 on the list somewhere down there. Like there are I would do the original Greek and Hebrew before that. These aren't in order. I would do cross references before that. There's a couple others that we'll get to that I would do before those. But they are very good study Bibles. And I don't know that we mentioned this, but some of these roles, depending on who's a part of your study, maybe the original Greek and Hebrew words is one that you want to split up into two people. Like you're both looking at this.
Right.
Maybe the cross references is only half a role. And so someone does that and their study Bible notes. You'll have to figure out how exactly you want to manage all of it. But we're just trying to give some resources.
Yeah.
But so one of the next ones I want to mention, I had the opportunity when I was in college to go, and Derek did as well, to go over and study in Israel for a month. And the professor that I had while I was over there, his name was Mark Turnage, and he has a study resource called Windows into the Bible, which is a book that he wrote. He actually, I'll share this quick story because it's funny. I find it funny. He probably didn't at the time, but he wrote this book called Windows into the Bible, and it's basically just a bunch of his notes of things he studied and learned, because he would share them in tours he would give of the Holy Lands, and pastors would hear it, go back to the United States and preach it as their own content without giving him credit, or they would publish it in a book as their own content without giving him credit. So he went ahead and published all of it so that people would stop doing that.
That's amazing.
Which it's unfortunate, but I applaud him for kind of taking the initiative. So he wrote a book, Windows into the Bible. He also has a podcast by the same name. His whole thing is, I think his tagline is like understanding the words of the Bible through grasping the world of the Bible. And so, not to get too far into it, his 4 windows of which to view the Bible are historical, spatial, like geography, cultural, and spiritual.
Yeah. And
so, like, understanding, one of the things that blew my mind, and this is the smallest thing that's ever blown my mind, often in the Old and New Testament, someone will say that they're going up to Jerusalem. When I hear going up to Jerusalem, that means, oh, they're going north.
Mm-hmm.
If I go down to Jerusalem, I'm going south. But Jerusalem, like elevation-wise, you had to go up from pretty much any direction in order to get to Jerusalem. And I was like, oh, that makes way more sense for them.
Yeah.
And just things like that. There's so much he has so much content that is a phenomenal resource to understanding the cultural context of the Bible. And so that's a role I'd highly recommend.
Well, and with it too, just geography in the Bible in general. I think for me, the thing that I didn't put 2 and 2 together until I was there, but you'd hear about Jesus in the wilderness. Being from Minnesota, when I hear wilderness, I think of the woods.
Mm-hmm.
I think of, vegetation, dead leaves, trees everywhere. You don't have that in Israel. At least not where they're talking about. When they say the wilderness, it's a dry, arid desert with nothing. So,
yeah, especially the south half of Israel. The north half actually had more vegetation than I was expecting.
Correct. I know. I thought the same thing. But it paints the picture, not only is Jesus 40 days without food, he's in a desert. Like that, when he's being tempted by Satan, it's no trip. Like he's in a desert by himself. Like that just really just changes the scope. And so, I think about, and again, I mentioned this earlier, but you have to understand that the writers that were reading the Bible undoubtedly are from this geography.
Right.
So they are writing, assuming that you and I might talk about snow removal very haphazardly and talk about certain snow plowing terms or whatever because we live this.
Yeah.
Whereas someone down in Texas is like, what the heck are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't even wrap my head around that. It's the same way with geography of the Bible. The authors are writing to an audience that already has the context.
Yep.
So we have to get into their minds and go, what is the context that they're surrounding themselves with so that we can make sure we're understanding what they're trying to get at.
Yes, having a map out when you read many portions of the Bible, Old Testament especially, where you can see, okay, they went from, Bethlehem to Nazareth. They went from Jerusalem to Jericho. Physically looking on a map and seeing what that trek looked like that's huge, and that can bring a lot of understanding.
And get the maps that are from that time period too, because things have changed. Things
no
have
kidding.
changed.
Accurate maps. Speaking of accurate stuff from the time period.
Nice transition.
Thank you. I'll go with another one here. This might be we got another one still. We're not going in order. That's my bad. Josephus. So Josephus was if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, I know you will, a Jew who was captured by the Romans and made friends enough that he was kept alive as a historian. I think he was a historian before he was captured. But this is all you got the uprising of the Jews in AD 70, which, they revolted and then the temple was destroyed by the Romans and it was this whole thing. But Josephus lived through that, and he lived at the time that a lot of the New Testament letters were being written. And so he was a contemporary to Paul, to John, to all of this stuff. And he was a historian, so he wrote a bunch of stuff down. Now, if you know anything about historians in basically most of history, you know that whoever signs their checks, or in this case, whoever keeps them alive, is probably in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are instances, reading Josephus, where he portrays the Roman government and the Roman soldiers, Roman authorities, in a good light.
Yep. Even though they weren't.
And they weren't necessarily. You're right. But, and Mark Turnage put it this way, we can trust Josephus when he had no reason to lie. He wrote extensively about the history of the Jews. Like he writes a lot of stories that are in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And so he wrote about the histories of the Jews. He also wrote about a lot of contemporary stuff, to him, contemporary, of the Jews. And most of that has nothing really to do with the Roman government. And so he just wrote it like it was. Plus, he was a Jew.
Yeah.
And so he had a stake in that game.
Mm-hmm.
It's where he wrote about the Roman government that, you might have to be a little bit leery with his writings. But where he wrote about the Jews, a lot of times, we can trust that. And so having somebody that can dive into that stuff a little bit, especially if you're reading through the Old Testament or the Gospels, that can, and even if, if we're going to read through Ephesians, maybe Josephus wrote something about the city of Ephesus, having somebody that can dive into that stuff can be really, really beneficial.
Yeah. All right, and then the last one I think is the only one we have not touched on, and I think this is the one that if you have someone in your group who admittedly is like, I'm a little slower, or I don't maybe get this as much, or
so this is my role.
didn't want to say it.
Somebody had to,
but no, this next resource is phenomenal, and I've watched a few of their stuff. And yes, I said watched. This next one is called The Bible Project. And it essentially, to my knowledge, is comprised of a bunch of very smart people who are very gifted in communicating the heart of the Bible in a way that's easy to digest. So, for example, what they will do is they will have, if you just go to thebibleproject.com, I believe, not .org, but if you just type in the Bible Project, they'll take you to their website, and they have each of the books of the Bible, and you click on them, and they have a comprehensive video that outlines the overall view of that book, some different highlights of each individual chapter, how it all ties together, and it's communicated narratively, I think, with illustrations. Like they really kind of take you through the book in a way that, is very thorough, but also is very comprehensive and concise. And they, along with the illustrations, to kind of help organize certain themes, organize elements, draw timelines. And so it's kind of like a 10,000-foot view, yet they kind of swoop in and look at things underneath the microscope and see how it contributes to the whole picture. So I love this resource for just having big picture. And ironically enough, Riley actually was gifted to him. They actually have a book version of this.
Really?
So the book is I kid you not, this tall and this wide, and they have the illustrations on the pages. So it's it's a really, really cool resource, and it kind of just outlines the whole thing. So this is a great, if a commentary is kind of like a magnifying glass of each individual word and chapter and verse, this is kind of like, a telescope of the whole picture, if you will.
Yeah. And so first of all, I don't want to rain on the parade, but you said a bunch of people putting this together. I think it's pretty much just two.
Is it?
I know.
Fine.
So Tim Mackey is it. So they have a podcast as well, under the same name, and Tim Mackey and I don't remember the name of the other guy that do the podcast. I think they're basically the main two guys that do most of the content, but they it's a phenomenal resource. Their podcast is really interesting. They actually just finished up, like basically going through, I think almost the entire Torah on their podcast, like chapter by chapter, which was really interesting. I didn't listen to all of it, but I want to go back and listen to it because they do very, very good work. They have kind of book by book videos that Derek was mentioning. They also have some videos that are more topical as well. Like I know they have a series of videos on, I think they call them spiritual beings. And so like they have one video on angels. They have one video on demons. They have one video on the multitude in heaven. Like, what is that? And what does that look like? And so like that's an interesting video series to go through if you're curious about some of that stuff. They also have a free app where you can find a lot of their content. And I want to say, I will get into. I have two more things I want to say on these different roles. One is that we are speaking to the 97% of all of these resources. I cannot personally speak to the entirety of Matthew Henry's theology.
Right.
I can't speak to 1% of Matthew Henry's theology. I can't speak to Matthew Henry. He's
speaking a different language.
He is speaking such a higher form of English that I can't speak to him anyway. But I cannot speak to the specific theological points of every single one of these people.
Yep. Nor do you need to.
Nor do I need to. Like, these are Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want that to get lost on our listeners.
Yep.
Like, it is okay to use a resource for your biblical study outside of your denomination.
It's encouraged,
right? If you are like Derek and I attend and work at Assemblies of God churches. If you want to use resources of David Platt, who is a Reformed theologian, go for it. If you want to use, I think David Guzik might be. I don't even know. I don't want to speculate. I think Matthew Henry might be Baptist. I'm just guessing. I feel like I remember that somewhere. David Guzik pastors. It's like Santa Barbara Calvary Chapel, something like that, which does not help in trying to figure out his denomination. But my point is, I don't know what denomination Josephus was either. Now that I think about it. I think he was Jewish.
He's classified as a Jewish Roman. I can't remember what it was.
My point is, like, most Christian denominations agree on like 95%, 97% of the Bible and of our theology. That is what we are advertising here.
Yeah.
And the point of having all these different resources is to get some different perspectives. I can list off the top like 8 denominations of Christianity in America, and I can point to pros and cons of each one, whether it's theology or practice.
Yep.
Not everybody has it all right.
Right.
I don't think anybody has it all right. And so I think that having that well-roundedness in your resources is important.
It's got to happen. And, I'd even encourage you, if there are others that are not on this list, like I can't tell you how many people have thrown out the baby with the bathwater. If I can't listen to this speaker because he's got, because there are certain sermons too that have some good content. Like,
yeah,
certain pastors have more of this teacher-like aspect to their communication, and just don't limit yourself. If you get some bad juju and some bad vibes from people that are not reputable, okay, for sure. But do you want me to do step 3?
Real quick before we go to step 3, I want to try to give if somebody's like, okay, that's a lot of resources, but we only got 5 people, what's most important?
Yeah.
I would say that
start with Josephus, then go
and Matthew
to
Henry.
Yep.
I would say that cross references.
Yep.
It's
number 1.
The cross references is a big key one. The original Greek and Hebrew words, I would list that as a big one. I would list Enduring Word as a big one, just because I think having one of the commentaries in there is important, and that's the first one I would recommend of the three. And then the other one is like the whole Mark Turnage Windows into the Bible geography of the Bible.
Yep.
Like the geography and cultural historical context.
Yep.
Having somebody that can specialize in that, that is the other one that I would highly, highly, highly recommend. You can get into other commentaries. You can dive into the Bible Project. You can dive into study Bible notes. But those ones are important. And then practically, when you're coming together, I would encourage the cultural historical person, the Mark Turnage person, and the Bible Project person. I would have those two people talk first.
Mm-hmm.
Because that will lay the foundation for the chapter or the section of the chapter that you're reading.
Yep.
And then, as you read through it, the cross-reference person chimes in. The original Greek Hebrew word person chimes in.
Yep.
And it starts to bounce back and forth from there, and everybody starts to get involved.
Yeah.
And don't push it.
Mm-hmm.
If you get on how many times have I been a part of a Bible study where we'd rabbit trail onto baptism?
Yeah.
And that was not at all what we were supposed to be talking about. But, we get really passionately talking about it and trying to find answers and just pursue that. And then you end up, 4 hours into your Bible study and you didn't even get halfway through the chapter. Fine. Start with the second half of that chapter the next week.
Yeah.
I would highly encourage going slow and going for quality versus just trying to speed through your Bible study.
I said this as a joke. Like you said only had 2 steps, so I jokingly put in a third. But I think it's like perfectly on par with both of our hearts. Because step 3 is this: pray and hope for the best. like I put that as a joke, but like you're spot on. Like if you go into a Bible study with the understanding that it's got to look just like this, you're probably going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
Because it is going to rabbit trail and you're going to talk about different things. But are you really going to tell me that's a negative thing? Because like there's no way. Like that. What is the goal of this? It's to grow in our faith, And so I have the same rationale with like Bible plans, like Bible in a year. Would you rather get through the Bible in a year but not have retained anything and applied it to your life, or got through it in a year and a half, but you're changed from the inside out? Like obviously the latter, not the former. Same thing with a Bible study. Like, and if nothing else, if people just aren't into it that day, but like there's a fellowship piece there that you can like come together and just apply the word to your life and pray together, that's cool too.
Mm-hmm.
Like obviously these are all good things. They're good practices. It's good to follow a structure and a framework. All those are great things. But I just think it's so critical to understand that like the Lord's going to use this opportunity to speak to the people in the room how he wants to speak to them. And so don't force it. Let the Holy Spirit move. Welcome him into it. I think starting with prayer is a good way to start, and then just see where it goes.
Yeah.
Enjoy the ride.
And it's going to be, it might be some trial and error. It might be, hey, I hate this role. Can I have a different one?
Right.
It might, switching them around. Maybe you just want to do that periodically to keep it fresh.
Right.
Like, hey, Derek, let's all rotate roles, or you and I swap roles. Just to bring a little life. Team up for a role. Hey guys, like I'm headed into a busy season at work. Or with school. Can I have someone share my role with me? Just for this season, or whatever it is, like, and maybe you come into it with, hey, we are going to, we're just going to do this Bible study for, we're going to do Ephesians. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a 6-week study, and then we're done.
Yeah,
and you can, you're not committing to this lifelong thing right away. Derek, what would you recommend, or do we have any thoughts on the podcast on? Is it more like, let's start a Bible study with like people we're really close to? Let's start a Bible study with people that we don't really know, but it's a way to create community within our church or within our youth ministry. Is one better than the other? Are both good? Are both terrible? Got any thoughts on that?
Yes.
Cool. Both are terrible.
I say that facetiously. I don't think there's a wrong way to go about it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think that certain studies are better for certain situations. Case in point, if you're a pastor, let's call a spade, and you are facilitating this Bible study, you probably are going to approach it with more of a, I'm here to facilitate and help lead and feed. Versus if you and your wife are sitting down with my wife and I, this is just pure on straight spiritual growth for me as a person.
Yeah.
And so I do think that the context, the goal is the same and the outcome can be the same even, but I think the motivation can be different. Because I do think that this is a great way to unify people together and bring people who wouldn't normally be together underneath one united goal. And all of a sudden you realize, hey, I kind of like you. But I also think there is some, especially if you're new, I think there's a lot of comfortability that encourages growth when you're around people that you know really well. Like if you're around people that you don't know, you might be less likely to speak up about this Greek and Hebrew word because you're unfamiliar with it yourself and you don't want them to think you're stupid, or you don't want them to say, no, you looked up that wrong. Like that's not that you like, that's not comfortable. So I do think that there's a comfortability doing it with people that you know, but I do think that both are good and both have better situations in which you'd want to implore them.
One thought coming to my mind just now is that I would highly recommend, pretty much in every context, that this be done in someone's home.
Yep.
Just that's going to be a much more comfortable and inviting atmosphere.
Yep.
And that can be very difficult to do with people you don't know. Not impossible. Doing it with people you don't know, but having a defined end date can give an out in case, like, hey, like this was good. It just isn't a long-term thing. If you are the pastor or the youth pastor, maybe you look at it as, hey, for the first maybe 8 or 12 weeks, I'm going to be a part of this, but then I'm going to lift myself out and let them take it and run with it from there.
Yep.
And then I'll go start another one.
Yep.
And you can kind of let it snowball like that. If you really want to get fancy with the snowball, like you could have a core group. We start this study, and then after 8 or 12 weeks, everybody goes out and starts their own.
Yep.
And it spreads through the church like that, or through the youth ministry like that. The other thought that I'm having is that whether or not you know the person could be, a factor to gauge. The spiritual maturity of everybody in the group could also be a factor. I don't think it's bad to have a Bible study where everyone is on the same spiritual maturity level, roughly.
Yep.
I also don't think it's bad to have a Bible study where, you've got some variability in the maturity level.
Yep.
As long as people's desire to learn is there and desire to grow is there, I think you can have, varying maturity levels and varying, lengths of walks. You just have to be mindful of that when you're setting expectations, and it might not be quite as deep as if it was 4 people or 6 people that are really, really close together and have been walking with the Lord, and their maturity level is about the same. Then they're going to be able to run at a different speed. But just knowing some of those things ahead of time might help with the expectations of the group, so that you can succeed. If you guys have whacked expectations coming into it, then that's not going to be good.
Yeah. That's all I got, man.
Bible studies are fun.
They are.
I'd highly encourage it. And I do think, we made light of this earlier, but have somebody bring desserts.
Yeah.
Food is important.
Yeah.
Bring good food. Have good food. And your Bible study will last longer. I guarantee it.
Yeah. And by good food, you mean good tasting.
Yes. What other kind of good food is there?
Don't bring the gluten-free fig roll for everybody to share. Like nobody's liking that.
Is there scientific evidence that it is harder to do a Bible study with someone on a keto diet?
There probably should be.
It's like you're doing the Daniel fast. That's great for your faith, but you're shunned from the Bible study until you're done with it.
Correct. Nobody wants
or
you.
Shunned from bringing food to the Bible study.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. All right. That's season 2. That's it. We made it. We're good to go.
We grew.
We did grow. We learned a lot about how not to be a youth pastor. I think that's safe to say, and hopefully our listeners did as well.
Yeah. We learned also how not to be podcasters. I think that's something we add to a repertoire. They now can put a name with the face, which...
Other way around. They can put a face with the name.
Well done.
Yep.
I think hopefully we didn't lose any listeners because they know what we look like.
Yeah, if we disappointed in that department.
Hopefully we also didn't gain followers because of what we look like, because we're both married.
Fair, yeah. I was going to say that, like, I'm not opposed to that, but then you brought that up and I was like, okay, yeah, if it's because of that. Like, it's kind of the same thing about, like, relationally coming to church and then finding God.
Yeah.
Like, if you like us because we're aesthetic, then cool. If you like us because you want to date us, we're taken. Like, I think that's really what it... And if you like us because of the clothes that we wear, I can't speak for Derek, but... Like,
something's wrong with you.
Dude, go look at a mannequin at Old Navy. We're wearing the same thing. I'm wearing a black t-shirt and holy jeans today. Also, I didn't know if I was going to bring this up on the podcast or not, and I'm going to try to wheel around here for the video. I am rocking socks and sandals today.
I did notice you had your Birkenstocks, which I'm impressed with.
I actually had students... make fun of me Sunday night at our high school Bible study because I was barefoot because we were outside. We were outside playing games and it was in the grass, and so I didn't have my shoes on. Actually, it was with a soccer ball, and I was wearing my Birks, and I was like, "That's a bad combination." But then I slipped them back on, and they were like, "Those aren't your shoes," and I was like, "Yes, they are." No, you don't have Birks, and I was like. I don't even know how to respond. Is this an insult? I can't tell. So I was a little offended by that.
I'm proud of you.
But
I've not jumped on the Burke train yet, but
these are new, I
maybe
guess.
one day.
So that's fair. But we appreciate everybody hanging out with us. Thank you to all of our viewers, all of our listeners, followers on Instagram. Season 2 is a wrap. We'll be back for season 3. But in the meantime, I think it's about time that Derek and I go on a vocal rest for about 3 months.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.